The law is not optional. Look, man, the people in the Donald Trump administration need to go to jail, for real, for real. And I am not saying that because I want a viral clip. I am saying that because I'm a black man in America and I have watched the law get treated like a boot, not a book. I have watched people lose decades over a sack of herb, lose their job over a missed court date, lose their life over matching a description. So when the most powerful people in the country start treating the United States Constitution like it is a menu they can order from, I do not want speeches. I want accountability. I want names. I want statutes. I want articles. I want numbers. I do not even want a truth and reconciliation committee. We, the people, want jail. Because when the system is hungry, it always finds a way to count our years. So tonight, I am going to count theirs. Tonight, I am going to treat the Trump administration like they are black folks. I want you to understand this story the way it actually lives, not the way it gets sanitized on cable news. This is not about ideology. This is about power deciding it does not have to explain itself anymore. This is about waking up one morning and realizing the people running the country are daring the Constitution to stop them. I grew up knowing that laws are not suggestions when they point downward. When the law points down, it is sharp, immediate, and unforgiving. But when the law points up in America, suddenly everybody needs nuance, context, patience, and grace. That imbalance is not accidental. It is cultural. And it is the same imbalance that allowed this administration from January 20th, 2025 through today in 2026 to stack unlawful actions on top of unconstitutional ones like it was just another Tuesday. Donald J. Trump returned to the presidency in 2024 and is president right now in 2026. A whole year of tomfoolery under his belt. One of his earliest moves was to go after birthright citizenship. That is not a policy tweak. That is an attack on the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. The 14th Amendment exists because this country once had to be dragged, kicking, and screaming into recognizing black people as citizens instead of property. Section 1 says plainly that anyone born in the United States is a citizen. There is no asterisk. There is no executive override. When Trump attempted to undo that with executive action, federal courts shut it down because Article 6 of the United States Constitution makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land. You cannot executive order your way around an amendment. And when a president tries anyway, that is not ignorance. That is contempt. After that failed, the administration moved where power always moves next in this country: money. Article 1 of the United States Constitution gives Congress control of the purse. Article 1, Section 9 says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury unless Congress authorizes it. That is the firewall between democracy and dictatorship. And yet the Trump administration, through the Office of Management and Budget and Executive Directives, attempted to freeze congressionally approved funds, not hypothetical funds, real funds, money that keeps Head Start programs open, money that keeps rural hospitals alive, money that keeps disaster relief moving when communities are already on their knees. Court stepped in because the Impoundment Control Act exists precisely to stop presidents from playing hostage with money they do not own. And while lawyers argued, real people felt it first. Grants paused. Clinics delayed care. Workers got furloughed. That is what an Article 1 violation looks like on the ground. Now let's talk about how that becomes criminal when you apply the same rules used on everybody else. When officials coordinate to interfere with lawful government functions, prosecutors reach for conspiracy to defraud the United States. Title 18, United States Code, Section 371, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. When officials submit misleading explanations, sign false certifications, or tell Congress one story while doing another. That is false statements. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001, up to 5 years. When they block oversight, slow walk subpoenas, or bury documents, that is obstruction of a congressional proceeding. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1505, up to 5 years. These are not exotic theories. These are the same paper crimes that put regular people away every single day. And while all that was happening, this administration decided the people whose job it is to catch corruption were the problem. Inspectors general were fired in waves, watchdogs, internal investigators, the folks who were supposed to tell Congress and the public when something smells wrong. A federal judge later ruled those firings violated the Inspector General Act because the administration did not follow the law required to remove them. But the deeper damage was not procedural. It was psychological. Every whistleblower saw what happened. Every career official understood the message. Keep your head down. Do not ask questions. Because when you fire the people watching you, you are not managing government. You are clearing the runway for abuse. Now let's talk about retaliation, because this is where the mask really slips. The Trump administration used executive orders and agency directives to target law firms based on who they represented and what cases they touched. Wilmer Hale was hit. Paul Weiss was pulled into the crosshairs. Courts stepped in fast, issuing restraining orders and warning about unconstitutional retaliation. Because when a government punishes lawyers for representing clients, it is not punishing elites. It is attacking the justice system itself. That violates the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. It violates the Fifth Amendment guarantee of due process. And if officials coordinate to deprive people of constitutional rights under color of law, that is a felony under Title 18 United States Code, Section 242, punishable by up to 1 year and up to 10 years if aggravating factors are proven. If multiple officials are involved, conspiracy against rights under Title 18 United States Code, Section 241, carries up to 10 years or more. At the same time, the administration decided that billionaires should be able to run government without accountability. Elon Musk was placed at the head of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, a private citizen. No Senate confirmation, no lawful appointment, yet exercising executive authority over agencies, staffing, and spending. A federal judge ruled this violated the Appointments Clause of Article 2 of the United States Constitution. That clause exists to stop exactly this scenario. Unelected power running public government, and the harm was not theoretical. USAID operations were slashed, international aid stalled, clinics overseas shut down. Overnight, people who never heard Elon Musk's name lost access to medicine because of decisions he had no constitutional authority to make. And again, if you apply equal rules, the criminal exposure stacks fast. Willful criminal conflict of interest under Title 18 United States Code, Section 208 carries penalties up to 5 years. Conspiracy to defraud the United States adds another 5. False statements to Congress or courts add 5 more. Obstruction of oversight adds 5 more. That is 20 years of exposure on paper for behavior that gets waved off as disruption when rich people do it. Now bring it back home, because the sharpest edge of state power always cuts domestic first. The Department of Homeland Security under Kristi Noem, with Stephen Miller designing policy and Tom Homan acting as border czar, ramped up enforcement with open disdain for due process. People were detained without hearings, transferred without notice, families left in silence. And then came the fatal shooting in Minneapolis involving an ICE agent and the death of Renee Nicole Good, a United States citizen. That incident was so serious that House Democrats introduced articles of impeachment against Kristi Noem, citing obstruction, abuse of power, and self-dealing. That is not rhetoric. That is Congress responding to blood on the ground. The Constitution here is not vague. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable seizures. When officials willfully deprive people of liberty under color of law, that is deprivation of rights under Title 18 United States Code, Section 242. 1 year minimum, 10 years if aggravating factors are proven. If death results, the exposure increases dramatically. Conspiracy against rights under Section 241 adds up to 10 years more. False statements and obstruction add another 10 combined. And every time someone says that's just enforcement, I think about how fast those same statutes get used when a badge is on the wrong side of the courtroom. And then there is Venezuela, Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, J.D. Vance breaking a Senate tie to block war powers debate. United States forces conducted a raid in Caracas that captured Nicolas Maduro. The administration argued it was law enforcement, not war. Congress said otherwise. Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. The War Powers Resolution exists because presidents keep trying to slide past that. The United Nations Charter prohibits the use of force against another nation except under narrow circumstances. And while politicians argued over memos, service members were put at risk, and civilians lived under the shadow of escalation they never voted for. If Congress was misled about authorization, false statements carry up to 5 years. If oversight was blocked, obstruction carries up to 5 years. If coordination is proven, conspiracy carries 5 years. That puts Pete Hegseth and anyone involved in the 10 to 15 year exposure range if charged the way ordinary people get charged for lying to the government. And while all of this is happening, something quieter but just as dangerous is unfolding in the background. The civil service is being hollowed out. Career officials are pushed out, pressured to resign, or sidelined for not being aligned. Buyouts are framed as generosity. Firings are framed as efficiency. But anybody who has studied power knows this move. You weaken the people who know the rules so that breaking the rules gets easier. Courts blocked parts of these mass actions because federal employment protections exist for a reason. They are not perks. They are safeguards against loyalty tests replacing law. And when agencies lose experienced professionals, the harm is not abstract. Disaster response slows. Consumer protections weaken. Veterans wait longer. Seniors miss benefits. This is how policy violence works without sirens. And if prosecutors ever decided to treat this like they treat ordinary folks, the legal hooks are familiar. Conspiracy to defraud the United States for coordinated unlawful firings carries up to 5 years. False statements used to justify removals carry up to 5 years. Obstruction of congressional oversight into those firings carries up to 5 years. And I keep saying this on purpose because these are the same paper crimes that send people away for a decade when they don't have a press secretary to soften the blow. Now let's talk about education, because this is where the long game shows itself. Linda McMahon, as Secretary of Education, moved to dismantle the Department of Education without congressional authorization. Congress created that department. Only Congress can dismantle it. That is Article 1 again. Not vibes, not efficiency, law. The effect of that move wasn't just bureaucratic. Civil rights enforcement in schools stalled. Special education oversight slowed. Students who already sit at the margins lost one more layer of protection. When courts and lawmakers pushed back, it was because the executive branch does not get to erase agencies it finds inconvenient. Again, the criminal exposure lane, if applied evenly, is straightforward. Conspiracy to defraud the United States for coordinated unlawful action carries 5 years. False statements to Congress about authority or intent carry 5 years. Obstruction of oversight carries 5 years. That is 10 to 15 years of exposure for actions that get framed as reform when powerful people do them. And then there is money, influence, and the revolving door that always spins fastest when nobody is watching. Howard Lutnick, a senior economic figure in the administration, publicly promoted private financial interests while holding public power. Using public office to benefit private business is not a gray area in the law. It is one of the oldest forms of corruption on record. If prosecutors can prove bribery or quid pro quo, bribery of public officials under Title 18 United States Code, Section 201 carries up to 15 years. Willful criminal conflict of interest under Title 18 United States Code, Section 208 carries up to 5 years. Conspiracy adds 5 more. That is 15 to 25 years of exposure, depending on what evidence shows. And I want to say this plainly. People have gone to prison for far less than using the weight of the United States government to juice private profits. Now, pause with me for a moment, because this is where people usually get uncomfortable. They start saying things like, that's extreme, or that's unrealistic, or that would never happen. And I always ask the same question. Unrealistic for who? Because none of this sounds unrealistic when the defendant is poor. None of this sounds extreme when the defendant is black. None of this sounds far-fetched when the system is hungry and decides to make an example out of somebody without power. This discomfort is not about the law. It is about who we are used to seeing on the receiving end of it. Before we read the verdict, I need to slow this down one last time, because this is where the system hides behind confusion on purpose. When you hear sentencing ranges instead of one clean number, that is not softness. That is how federal law actually works. Prosecutors charge counts. Judges decide whether sentences run at the same time or stack. Juries decide guilt count by count. And history shows us something ugly but consistent. Powerful people almost never get hit with the maximum on every count. Not because the law does not allow it, but because discretion suddenly becomes sacred when the defendant has money, friends, and institutions invested in their comfort. Poor people do not get that grace. Black people do not get that grace. Immigrants do not get that grace. They get charged heavy and sentenced fast. So when I give ranges, what I am really showing you is the ceiling the law allows and the floor that power usually lands. Now imagine this like a real courtroom, not television, not commentary, a courtroom where the evidence has been entered, the Constitution has been read aloud, article by article, and the jury has deliberated without cameras or spin. The foreperson stands, the room goes quiet. Once the verdict is read, we don't need any violent outbursts from people in silly red hats. You will go to jail also. All right, we the jury find as follows. Donald J. Trump. For conspiracy to defraud the United States, false statements, obstruction of a congressional proceeding, and coordinated deprivation of constitutional rights under color of law. Total potential sentence, 25 to 35 years. Pete Hegseth. For conspiracy, obstruction of Congress, and false statements related to unauthorized military action and war powers violations. Total potential sentence, 10 to 15 years. Pam Bondi. For conspiracy to weaponize the Department of Justice, obstruction of oversight, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Total potential sentence, 10 to 30 years. Marco Rubio. For conspiracy, false statements to Congress, and obstruction related to foreign operations and unlawful executive action. Total potential sentence, 10 to 15 years. Christy Noam for deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy against rights, false statements, obstruction, and supervisory responsibility over unlawful enforcement actions resulting in death and serious harm. Total potential sentence, 16 to 30 years. Elon Musk for willful criminal conflict of interest, conspiracy to defraud the United States, false statements, and obstruction of congressional oversight while exercising unlawful executive authority. Total potential sentence, 15 to 20 years. Linda McMahon for conspiracy, false statements, and obstruction related to unlawful dismantling of a congressionally created federal agency. Total potential sentence, 10 to 15 years. Howard Lutnick for bribery, willful criminal conflict of interest, and conspiracy to use public office for private gain. Total potential sentence, 15 to 25 years. And now I'm going to end exactly where I started, because that is how truth circles back on itself. Look, man, the people in the Donald Trump administration need to go to jail. For real, for real. Not because I am angry, not because I am partisan, but because the United States Constitution is not optional, and the law cannot only be real when it is pointed at the powerless. If a black man can lose his freedom over a sack of herb, over suspicion, over proximity, then powerful people do not get immunity for shredding the Constitution in broad daylight. Either the law applies to everyone, or we finally admit who it was written to protect. This is Marcus Ferrell Live. Like, follow, share. History is watching.